Okay, parents, this is a conversation you need to listen to. I had my dear friends Whitney and Brandon Cawood on, and they talk all about their experience with synthetic dyes. And before you turn it off, please listen. It is amazing the impact they've seen in their son. It is amazing the impact Hannah and I have seen in our sons. You definitely want to hear their advice, their information, and their story. Here's my friends Whitney and Brandon. Welcome to the family table. I'm Matthew Eford. Join me as I speak with parents, caregivers, and family experts about the joys and challenges of family life. We'll share the stories, advice, and insights that will help you build a loving and resilient family. Pull up a chair and join us at the family table. Welcome, everyone, to the family table. I have my dear friends, Brandon and Whitney Cawood, here with me. I'm so excited to hear more about their story and share their story with you. And it's something that we have been following along with since they started posting on social media about synthetic dyes and the impact that it's had in their son and in their family as a whole. So, Brandon, Whitney, introduce yourself, those who may not know you. Tell us kind of about your family, the makeup of your family, and then let's get into the synthetic dye. So let's start first. Introduce yourselves and your family.
All right, well, I'm Brandon, and I'm here with my wife Whitney. I am by trade, I'm a commercial photographer, like an advertising photographer and a cinematographer. So I do a lot of work in advertising for different brands and things like that. That's kind of my day-to-day job. So film, is kind of our like video work is already a part of my daily life. We had never made a film before this project, but luckily that's kind of in my vein of work, and so that's what I do.
I love that.
Yeah, and so my name is Whitney. Brandon and I are obviously married, and so I began my adult life as a teacher. So I taught for a few years.
Okay.
We had a whole fertility journey, which we could do an entire podcast on.
Sure.
And I decided to quit, and I kind of became the marketing leg of our business. I've had several kind of business ventures as a part-time working mom, as I'm also like I've kept my kids at home until now. Our oldest is in public school, but he's a really great STEM school. But anyway, I this business venture, this documentary has been really great because it's kind of combined like our natural skills, like in marketing and social media, being as something I have done in my past, and now that I'm currently doing as a freelance marketer, and then also Brandon's like skill with videography and business and also photography. So
I love that. And we will definitely have you back to talk about your pregnancy journey. Hannah and I have had similar stories in that, and I would love to get y'all's feedback on that and be able to help our audience that may be struggling with that. But how many kids do you have? When did you get married? And then go ahead and introduce this idea of the synthetic dyes.
So we have two kids. We have a daughter, Aslan, who is currently 4 years old, and then our son, which is he's at the root of this whole documentary. Our son Atreyu, he is 6 years old, and we got married back in 2014. So we've been married almost 11 years now,
That's
and we our son, like I said, our son's 6 years old, so we became parents a little over 6 years ago.
fantastic. So when did you start seeing what is for those who don't know? Okay, tell us about synthetic dyes. I know your whole documentary, right? You're going to get into a lot of that. But how did you come across this?
yeah, so I'll start off by telling our journey.
Yeah, please.
So our son, between the ages of 1 and 3, he was a bit of a mystery. Most days were really, really rough. A lot of hitting, and he couldn't cope with being told no. So we had a lot of fits, and he was just sad and upset. But I guess I should have really prefaced this by saying he's always been like really sweet, good, smart, wonderful child. So we would have a lot of days that were really rough, especially when we went out and birthday parties. And he was at a mother's morning out, so we had a lot of trouble there when we went to church and with friends especially. And we were kind of seeing it permeate every aspect of our life. But then we'd have these days where he was like almost a different kid. He was so easygoing, easy to reason with. The things that were an issue before, were no longer an issue on those days. So we were like, oh, what is going on? And so for your listeners that have kids between the ages of 1 and 3, they're like, okay, yeah, that's normal, especially if you have boys. Boys hit, boys scream,
Yeah.
boys have fits. I
Oh, yeah.
mean, girls do too, but boys are boys. But what was not normal was the amount of times it happened per day. And when he went to his mother's morning out, we were getting ride-ups daily. I was having to pick him up really, really frequently, at least once or twice a week, and he was only going 2 or 3 days a week,
Yeah.
and that's from 9 to 11:30. And so it was happening at church. We were having to take him out at church and at the gym. So it was really every aspect of our life, everywhere I dropped him off, I was expecting a phone call, and that just was like we were really in that line between like, is this normal toddler behavior or is there something wrong?
Sure.
And
Which is
so
exhausting. It's your first kid. You
Mhm.
don't have a
we
clue.
had
Yep.
no idea what to do. And I'm glad you said that because I'm kind of really proactive in that I'm the kind of person that listens to all the podcasts, reads the book. So I felt like I was doing all the things and nothing was working.
Yeah.
And so, it really just kind of came to a head, and I decided to look into diet and to see if that could be affecting him.
Okay.
And so I found an article that suggested eliminating wheat, dairy, and synthetic dyes. And so within
Okay.
48 hours, we had basically a different child. And that child that we had on those good days, we had that child for 30 days straight. So it was almost an immediate, like, wow, this
Wow.
kid is, I mean, he may have hit us once that month, and that compared to how often it was happening before. And, we could go places and drop him off, and it was so much easier. And so it was an elimination diet. So I reintroduced wheat and we saw no effect. And then about a week later, I reintroduced dairy and we saw no effect. And then we reintroduced synthetic dyes. And within 15 minutes, all those behaviors that we have been seeing those years just
Wow.
came flooding back.
Yeah.
And the most surprising aspect about that is really that we were already kind of just in this, our home really had mostly like good healthy snacks and mostly like organic foods. And so it was kind of surprising because really the only place he was getting synthetic dyes daily was his daily allergy medicine. And then he had chronic ear infections. So he was always on antibiotic that was bright red. That year I think he had 8 antibiotics before we put
Wow.
tubes in.
Okay.
And so he was kind of on that Red 40 loop. And then at night the doctor said anytime they had a runny nose, which is all the time, your
Yeah.
children always have a runny nose. They said anytime they had a runny nose to give him Benadryl at night to kind of, dry up the fluid. And so he was kind of on a Rev 40 loop with medication. And so we were really surprised because when you look at the ingredients label, the Rev 40 and the dyes are at the very bottom of the ingredients label oftentimes. So it's a very small amount of synthetic dyes, and it had such a dramatic effect on him. And so we saw like massive shifts, like he was able to get along with his friends, and obviously like our entire family dynamic had completely shifted. We could
Sure.
breathe again, and we weren't as worried. We could go on play dates. And so I went from thinking I was going to have to homeschool my child for him and then also to protect other kids to he is thriving. He has been in public school. He's in first grade now. So we've done public school where we have a great STEM school. And so he's done pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. He has not hit a single child. He's
Wow.
not had a meltdown. He hasn't screamed. He hasn't been upset. He hasn't cried. When we have parent teacher conferences, they're like, yeah, there's really nothing we need to work on. Like he's a really good kid. And so it's just this massive shift between we had so many issues before, and then we eliminated dyes, and we could finally, it's like his brain could slow down and we could talk through those issues.
Okay.
And the impulsivity and the aggression immediately went away. And so we like to say like 98% of our issues were solved by eliminating dyes, and the other 2% he could actually like respond to our parenting,
Okay.
and you could learn from things. And so
So
it was really
you've
shocking to me.
mentioned Red 40 a couple of times. That's the one that most
Yeah.
people are most familiar with. Is that the one, or was it across the board all synthetic dyes?
For him, yeah, it's pretty much, we've realized it's pretty much any synthetic dyes seem to
Okay.
affect. I mean, we haven't gone so far to be like, okay, let's give him just blue one and see
For
if
a
that
week,
affects him.
yeah, no.
But it seems like it wasn't just red 40. And so maybe we should even like break this down on an even like more understandable level, a lot of people might be like, what is synthetic dyes? So basically like food coloring. Synthetic dyes are your
Okay.
typical food coloring, and the way they show up on labels for things that are manufactured in the United States are a color and a number. So like you said, red 40. Red 40 is the most widely used one, and that's probably why you hear the most about it.
Okay.
But red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6, those three are the most widely used, like those three. And then you also have a blue 1 and blue 2 and green 3, red 3, which is a very interesting one. We can talk a little bit about that. And then there's a couple more. There's orange B and then citrus red 2. But both of those, like citrus red 2 is only used on orange pills, and that hasn't been used for years now. So like it's still allowed, but it's not really used. And then
Which is crazy that that's legal.
Yeah.
orange B,
Seriously.
I think, is technically only allowed for like sausage casings and things like that. But I don't think it's really
It's
used
not
that much
used as
anymore,
often
so.
either. Yeah.
But so there's 9 that are allowed, but really only 7 that are still used today.
So you
And I do want
find
to say, like you can eat your oranges with orange B and citrus red too. Like synthetic dyes have to be batch certified, so every single batch has to be sent to the FDA, and so you can actually look it up and see like, okay, how many batches of Red 40 have been approved this month, and so it's very very rare that it's used. It hasn't been used in several years, so I don't want any of your listeners to avoid oranges
yeah,
because
they don't
that's
use
Yeah,
it
yeah.
for
legal.
oranges anymore, but they
Yeah.
used to.
Yeah.
Enjoy the natural vitamin C. The
There you
oranges
go.
are very good for you. So I want to take a little bit of a step back. Um, you see amazing results with him, right? I mean, it instantaneously you see the negative impacts of them, and it's not so much confirmation bias. I mean, you're just seeing it. You're seeing
Correct.
it in him. To give our audience an update, we've done this with Walker, and it is night and day difference. I mean, it is across the board night and day difference. The way that he responds, exactly what you said, the way he responds to parenting, the way it allows his brain to think. He's a brilliant little boy, but when he's on synthetic dyes and we can know that he's had consumed them, it's like his mind's going a million miles an
Yep.
hour and he cannot think. He cannot stop to think. He cannot stop to process. So give us like, what should parents be looking for? They've got kids. Okay. It's just my kid's just full of energy, which he may be there, especially
Yeah.
little boys.
Yeah.
But what is something that parents could be looking for? They may say, I don't really know. This kind of sounds like crunchy synthetic dyes, or they're
That's what we
approved.
thought too.
They're approved
Yeah.
by the FDA. Like, I mean, somebody says they're
Oh,
okay.
geez.
So what would you say to them? What should they be looking for?
Well, I will preface so the way Atreyu responds and the way that some other kids responds is kind of on the extreme end. So it's not like
But not
the-
uncommon, like you
yeah, it's
said.
not
We've-
uncommon. but-
Tons of our friends, many of our family, they have very similar reactions to our
but,
boys.
but the average kid probably isn't like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But
Yeah.
and we originally thought we were probably okay, we must be like a really, really rare case. And surely there's not that many kids out there like Atreyu. But we did we started a Facebook group a little bit before we actually started doing the film. And we quickly realized that this is a way more common than we
Yeah.
anticipated. That group in 2 years has gone from, 2.5 years or so has gone from 0 to, I think we just hit 620,000. Like,
Over, yeah.
yeah. So like, and we hear
That's
now
amazing.
we hear stories like ours every single day from like hundreds and hundreds of families. And so it is a lot more common than you think. But
And some stories are even worse, like stories that we
Yeah.
have documented in our documentary. They're even more heart wrenching than just my child doesn't have any impulsivity. But synthetic dyes, for those of you who don't understand what they are, and we didn't when we began this journey, I guess I should back up in that when we saw his reaction and how dramatic it impacted his life and how crazy of a shift it was, I almost didn't want to tell people because it was insane. It was
Yeah.
insane that a synthetic dye that he was just receiving from his allergy medicine and like the occasional birthday party would have such dramatic effects on him. So I kind of like went down the rabbit hole of looking at research, and I I was trying to like decode this jargon, and I'm
Sure.
not a scientist, so it was confusing. So I had a lot of questions. So I asked Brandon if he would be willing to document our journey as I asked these researchers my questions, and they said yes. And so that's kind of our journey in making the film. But what we learned is that synthetic dyes are often made as a byproduct of petroleum. They can be made a couple of ways, but if you let just that fact sink in, that synthetic dyes are a chemical that are a very, very cheap byproduct of petroleum that's used to color our food, that has no like, it doesn't help it to taste better. It actually kind of has a bitter taste. It doesn't help the shelf life. The only use for synthetic dyes is cosmetic. So it's basically makeup for our food, so that marketers or so that companies can make their foods visually more appealing so that we buy them. And
It's
so
amazing.
that's insane that
Yeah.
you think that, and especially the fact that oftentimes colorful foods are marketed to children. You go down the aisles and aisles of colorful cereals and candies with cute characters, and it's kind of sickening. Um, and so you would think, okay, the FDA has approved these. They obviously think that they're safe. But then you realize, okay, in the EU, they have a warning label. And in our documentary, we actually flew to the EU and we interviewed the researcher responsible for the warning
We flew
label
to
in
London.
in London. Yeah, yeah. Now they're no longer in the EU. But we flew to London and we interviewed him. And so you learn that other countries have stricter regulations for this. And but what I think one of the most shocking things to me that I learned is that the California report, the OEHA did a very extensive report.
Okay.
And so it put together a bunch of research. So 27 clinical trials on children, just looking at the neurobehavioral effects in children. And they found that it obviously affects children and that it causes hyperactivity, inattentiveness, restlessness, sleeplessness, irritability, and aggression was their exact conclusion. Like,
Wow.
that is what they concluded,
Causal, that it's
that
causal.
it can cause that in some children. And so it's not all children. They also concluded that children in low income families were more oftentimes exposed to dyes.
Sure.
And you have less access to healthy foods. Or for us, we have the ability to drive to Chattanooga and we can go to Whole Foods, we can go to Trader Joe's, I have an Aldi, like, and I only work part-time, so I have the flexibility to do all the things and to make all the things. But you're a single mom, you don't have a car. Like in our city, many of the families here, we have a lot of poverty where we live. Many of the families don't have a car, they have a taxi. You're not going to take a taxi to Chattanooga to get all
Yeah.
the fancy food. Like,
Yeah.
that's just the reality. And so that's pretty shocking. In the report, they even talk about how it can mask or it can mimic ADHD type symptoms
Or exacerbate.
or make it worse. So you have a child that may already biologically are wired more to have ADHD. And then you couple that with aggression, irritability, sleeplessness, and that just makes all of their symptoms so much worse.
And then most of ADHD medication has
have synthetic dyes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I do want to come back to what you were asking though. So you're asking
Please.
like what can parents do? So like I said, I was saying like our son is an extreme case, but realistically what we always advise, if you it's not good. It's not good for anybody. These are chemicals that your body wasn't made to process, wasn't made to be ingesting. So it's not, even if you're not seeing any effects, it's not a bad idea to eliminate them. But if you're wanting to see if it's affecting your child's behavior, like we suggest doing an elimination diet for 30 days. If you take out dyes, and for us it happened a lot faster. We saw results a lot faster. But if you eliminate synthetic dyes for 30 days and just observe your child and kind of pay attention to their behavior and see if their mood is affected or shifted at all. And what a lot of people see, a lot of people might not see a lot at the very beginning when they remove synthetic dyes, but once they've kind of detoxed their kid for 30 days and then they give it back to them, they see like this huge spike in like
Yeah.
because it's almost like you've cleared it out of your body and all of a sudden you're reintroducing it. So yeah, I think it's a pretty easy thing. There's no harm in removing synthetic dyes. It's not hard. It's not.
There's
it's,
nothing to gain from them outside of your food looks
right.
prettier.
Exactly. And it's not, so there's nothing to lose, but like if you are somebody like us and a family like us who has, such a dramatic shift, like it changed the trajectory of his life. Like we were wondering if we were going to have to homeschool him, not really have a choice. We were wondering if like for his sake, for other kids' sake, and he was having trouble making friends. The teachers were telling us that the kids didn't want to play with him because he was like, he wasn't mean. He just like didn't have the impulse control.
Well,
He
and they
was
would even say that. They're like, he wasn't even mad. It was just like it came out of nowhere. Like he just tackled a kid. And I think one of the teachers, geez, it still kind of gets me fired up. But she, this Mother's Morning Out, he was 3 at the time. And she said, in my 20 years of teaching, I have never met a child that's as smart as your kid. But he's in the top 3 worst kids I've ever taught. And I'm like, geez,
Wow.
man, that hits
Wow.
hard.
Yeah, that hits
So,
hard.
like, the teachers obviously, like, and as a former teacher, it was hard for me because I wanted to comply to what they were asking me to do. They wanted us, they kind of twisted our arm, and they wanted us to get an evaluation and to start an RTI, which an RTI is a response to intervention plan,
Yeah.
which would follow him through 12th grade. And we just really didn't feel comfortable with that because we were already doing the behavior therapy, we were consulting doctors, like we were doing all the things. We didn't feel like at 3 we need to start an RTI. And so it was hard for me, like as a mom, to kind of push back on what the teachers were recommending, because I wanted to be compliant. Like I want people to like me and I want them to know that I'm easy to deal with. But the reality is it didn't feel right as a mom. And I had a very, very sweet mom change my life one day in the parking lot. She has a child with autism. And I was telling her our situation, and she explained, insurance will cover therapy if there is a diagnosis. And she was like, it is advantageous for certain kids to go ahead and do that. But the reality is if it doesn't feel right with you, God made you his mama, and there's a
Yeah.
reason it doesn't
Amen.
feel right. And so listen to your gut, and he picked you for a reason. And if it doesn't feel right, then don't do it. And I'm so glad because just a couple weeks later, I started looking into his diet, and it changed his life. And he doesn't have ADHD. He doesn't have any of the problems that he was having before. And not every child that eliminates synthetic dyes are going to have this massive shift.
Sure.
But for him, it was, and for so many of our friends and family, it's like that. And so if you're a mom or if you're a parent listening, and you want to remove synthetic dyes, it's as easy as learning how to read a label. And so you look at the ingredients label and you look for a color and a number. So it'll be FDNC Red 40, or it'll just say Red 40 Blue 1, and it should be listed on the ingredients label. And it's by law they have to list it in food.
A lot of times you'll see like color added or artificial colors. Those aren't
Synthetic dyes.
Those aren't synthetic dyes. That's
They're
typically
annatto.
mean it's going to be like a natto or turmeric
Turmeric
or something
or-
like that. Like those don't necessarily have to be listed. They can fall under the artificial dyes or the color added. But synthetic dyes, by law, if it's manufactured in the United States, have to be listed on the label with the color and the number.
And so we've created resources to make that as easy as possible. Obviously, we mentioned our group, Dye-Free Family Swaps Recipes and Resources.
That's on Facebook.
That's on Facebook. And
I'll definitely put that link in the show notes.
Great. And then also on todieforthedocumentary.com/resources, I've put a lot of time into creating resources for parents to just go ahead and get started. And in that, we have templates that you can write to your state representatives and school boards, but also I think really the good nuggets are I have lists that help you get through the holidays and dye-free lists and Amazon lists, but I have a blog that teaches families how to systematically eliminate synthetic dyes. You go through your pantry, you look at this, what to look for, and tips and tricks. And so that has helped a lot of families. So if you just don't even know where to start and you're really a beginner, like we were at the beginning of our journey, then we have those resources for you to help you get started.
That's fantastic. That was going to be something I asked. Where do you start? And then from a practicality standpoint, what does it look like for y'all when you go to a birthday party and they have the green and red and orange and yellow cupcakes and they have the pretty icing on top of them and everybody's super excited? Or Halloween, or talk to us about that. Talk to us about some of the practical steps that you found to help your family stay and to make sacrifices for your kids.
So luckily, Atreyu was young when we started doing this, and then our daughter has grown up. She doesn't remember a time that we weren't dye-free. So luckily they're like very open, and Atreyu's like his own best advocate. He asked to see labels at school if
Does
teacher
it have
handed
dye in
something.
it?
I love that.
He can read it. Like those were some of the first words that we taught him to read
To
on
read,
labels
yeah.
with colors. So we typically do a lot of swaps. So we have we at the beginning of the year and throughout the year, Whitney will bake cupcakes and she'll freeze them. She'll send us to the school. Luckily, the school has a freezer they can put them in.
So
And
for birthday parties at school, we just keep them. We treat it almost like a peanut allergy. We have these little mini cupcakes, and for us, we do it together. And I let him pick like what flavor, what do you want on it, and like this time he wanted it to look like worms and mud, and so
Yeah, cool.
yeah. So we you can buy all those things. You can buy the fun, silly, dye-free gummy worms, and you can make your icing look beautiful with natural dyes. And so that's what we do. We freeze cupcakes for school, and then we also keep a stash of frozen things at our house just for like birthday parties and things like that. If we don't have something, a swap in our house, then Panera, we have a Panera where we live there. Even their colorful cookies are dye free. Um, most Dunkin' Donuts, most of the donuts Dunkin' Donuts makes are oftentimes dye free, even the sprinkly ones. So you can always grab one of those at a birthday party. And then for his school, we have a swap box. So gummies are something you see at parties a lot. So we send the dye-free gummies, and then everybody has Cheetos. So we send like a Cheeto swap, and then we also send a drink swap because Kool-Aid jammers are usually
Yeah.
the top picks for school parties. And then for like Halloween, um, luckily most chocolate that is dye free. So we go about our life normally. We don't avoid family gatherings. We don't avoid birthday parties or trick or treating. We just do life normally. And then they know that we normally have a swap for them. And so I oftentimes buy something colorful and a cute swap. Like this year, I bought these cute little Smarties from Europe that were delicious. They weren't Smartie brand, but they had never had a candy like that. So we buy the colorful swaps, and then we let them have some chocolate on the day of. And then actually, I don't love sugar in general. So I said, would you rather have a new toy or would you rather have all this Halloween candy? Like
That's
we had
smart.
enough for a few days. And then I was like, the rest of this we can donate if you would rather have a toy that you can enjoy all year. And so they did that. So that was fun. So that's kind of
That's
how
really cool.
we navigate life.
So a family gets started by looking at labels, reading labels. Obviously, there's the resources we're going to link in the show notes. Do you find this a lot in when you go out to restaurants? Is that something they need to be aware of? A lot of
Sure.
your either fast food or sit down restaurants, or where do you find this most
Well,
common?
yeah, I mean, to an extent, like a lot of fast food, like, um, you know, Burger King is one that doesn't have artificial dyes. They took out
In
artificial
their food.
dyes and flavors. Now their drinks, like if you get Mountain Dew or something like that, then it's gonna have dye in it. But a lot of times your chicken and your hamburger and stuff like that isn't typically.
Oftentimes.
It's usually gonna be like your highly processed stuff. So stuff that comes in a package, or stuff that has candy on it that's colorful. But yeah, most of these restaurants today will list their ingredients. Some of them don't, but like a lot of them do. And then but yeah, we kind of know how it goes. And with him being so sensitive, if we don't know what the ingredients are, then we just avoid it.
Yeah,
But
that sounds
it's
smart
not
just to
crazy.
avoid.
But you do find it in some weird places, like Chick-fil-A. For the most part, most of their food doesn't have dye. There's a couple milkshakes and things like that that have dye. But then, like randomly, their spicy chicken has red 40 in it, just to
Wow.
make it look a
Yeah,
little
make it look a
more
little
red.
more red. Yeah.
So
Yeah, so
we really don't eat anywhere unless they have an ingredients list, which really they should. All restaurants should, but a lot of mom and pop places don't.
Yeah.
So we avoid those unless we talk to them. Like I call beforehand and I'll ask people. Usually they're pretty understanding, but I can say we went to a restaurant one time and our kid wanted a hot dog. That was really the only thing he'd eat at the time. He's a good eater now, but so I asked them to look at the hot dogs, expecting maybe the hot dogs oftentimes, like the red hot dogs,
Yeah.
oftentimes have dyes, but the buns actually had yellow 5 in it. So I was really shocked. So we don't go anywhere unless there's an ingredients label. If you're a parent and you're avoiding them and all of a sudden your child has synthetic dyes, um, don't beat yourself up. just let them detox it out of their system and then start over. But we avoid them the best we can because it's just we don't cheat. Like there's a lot of things like sugar. I mentioned sugar. We on occasion, of course, birthday parties, celebrations, like we have a good time, but with synthetic dyes, it's not worth it to us because
Yeah.
it's 48 hours of he's not happy, he's not sleeping
Yeah.
good. And so it's not worth it at all for us.
Well,
We used to- Go ahead.
we also understand that everybody is economically at a different level. So like it's not so like we're not like hard pressed like you have to throw everything in your house with dye in it out and start fresh. Like we get it like if maybe like transitioning stuff out like I've already bought this. It's really up to you. If a kid like ours like
If you're desperate,
even just a little bit affects him, but like
yeah.
but if it's more of like you're doing it for health reasons or stuff like that, if you need to, like, there's no shame in slowly transitioning it
Yeah.
out and like finding, using up the rest of what you have.
Yeah.
We're not telling everybody
And
use.
we even eliminate even like hand soaps and things like that because
Sure.
for our son, even like a temporary tattoo, we did not think about I had heard, what you put on your skin goes into your body, but I had no idea until we went to Florida and what's the restaurant?
Pineapple Willies.
Pineapple Willies. Okay. Pineapple Willies, they give you these temporary tattoos. And before we left the restaurant, he was irate, pitching a fit. And it was the first time he had hit us in like 6 months. It was over something so trivial, like he needed to go to the bathroom and I wanted to take him to the girls' bathroom instead of the boys' bathroom. And we were like, whoa, like, where did this come from? And so we avoid even like hand soaps. And so like Brandon said, like there's no shame. And if you want to just slowly transition and find products as you go, that's fine. For us, we were so desperate. We just completely got rid of it all. We donated it and then,
threw
found
it
dye-free
away.
swaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also
It
Well,
is.
Some of it we threw away.
It is amazing to see the impact. The 48 hours we've seen that with Walker too, right? He has it, and it's a solid day, 24, 36 to 48 hours of him to come back down to kind of normal level for him. And then you also find a lot of alternatives. So you just start replacing one with another, and more companies are coming out. So talk to us about what's happening. You talked about the EU, or you went to London. What are some differences that we see overseas versus what we see here, and what's some things that hopefully are coming down the pike here?
So what happened in Europe was they did this study, Dr. Stevenson and another guy they did a study together and pretty much determined that they were focusing on the azo dyes. So that's in America, the azo dyes that we have are red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6. So because of their research, the European government decided that they wanted to
The
put
EU.
a warning label. So now it's just the EU. So they put a warning label on foods that contain those azo dyes, red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6.
Wow.
So, but what happened was like even like American manufacturers like did not like the idea of putting a warning label on their food. Nobody like they don't want a warning label that's going to turn parents off from buying their product.
Sure.
So what they did in the EU is they've reformulated. So there's like Fruit Loops is really big in the news right now. I don't know. I mean, maybe people have heard about what's going on with Fruit Loops, but Fruit Loops makes a version for Canada that doesn't have synthetic dyes, where right here across the border in America, it still does have synthetic dyes, and also their European version doesn't have synthetic dyes. So there's a lot of companies like that. So as of right now, what's happened is in 2023, California banned the first like ban with synthetic dyes. And the first movement that we've had in a while has been California in 2023. They banned Red 3. And I'll just give you a quick
So
breakdown.
yeah,
of Red 3.
you mentioned Red 3 earlier. Tell us about Red 3.
Yeah,
So
this is a
Red
good
3. So
segue.
back in the 60s, we in the late 50s and the early 60s, they came out with some regulations, and that's when kind of the FDA started doing a lot of the regulating of what's allowed with colors and things like that in food. But at the time they didn't have enough information, so they kind of put the dyes that were allowed on this provisional approval list. So they weren't permanently approved yet; they were provisionally approved, like temporarily approved. But there was this loophole where companies could petition the FDA and ask them to make dyes permanently approved. So in 1969, the Food and Ingested Drug Industries petitioned and got Red 3 permanently approved in food and ingested drugs. Well, fast forward, the study was done in the 80s that determined that by feeding Red 3 to rats, that it was causing cancer, like thyroid. I think it was thyroid cancer. And so in 1990, the FDA banned Red 3 in cosmetics and externally applied drugs, but they didn't ban it in food, ingested drugs, and that's because
So that was before we were born.
So it's wild.
So they said they didn't feel like they could ban it in food and ingested drugs because of the cosmetics petition.
They said they were going to take steps to take it out of food.
For
and 34 years, like almost 35 years later, they've not done anything.
So there's also there's this little clause in it's called the Delaney clause. That's part of the food additive amendment and the color additive amendment that essentially says the FDA is not allowed to approve foods that are known to cause cancer in animals or humans.
Or is it how you test to see if something causes cancer? You wouldn't test it on your
been
grandma.
Sure.
Been, decades now since they've known it causes cancer, and they've been saying they're going to take it out. So in 2023, California was the first state to go ahead and say, you know what, we're going to ban it. And so that kind of sparked. There's 10 other states right now that have similar bills on the table to ban Red 3. Well, then this year.
Well, and they have tried to take steps at the federal level. Like there's been a lot of groups like CSBI, Center for Science and the Public Interest, the Environmental Working Group. There's been a lot of groups that have asked the FDA to remove it from the approval list.
Or to regulate it or add warning labels.
They have not gotten around to it. So it's kind of insane. California has also done something that I think is probably even more powerful or equally as powerful to taking away Red 3. And they have now banned synthetic dyes in California public schools, which is incredible. Amazing. Because, and we even touch on this in the documentary, is it lawful? Is it lawful? Is it, it is lawful technically, but is it ethical to feed children foods with synthetic dyes? So you give them Fruit Loops for breakfast, and then you have a child that neurologically reacts, which statistically in every school, there are children that react to synthetic dyes. Like there are. So you feed that child synthetic dyes, and then you penalize them, you kick them out of school, they miss the field trip, or you punish them, and then you've given them foods that have made it harder for them. And we know that it does. There's 27 clinical trials that shows that it affects certain kids. And oftentimes it's the kids that need the most protecting. So if you're in an inner city school, 70 to 80% of the foods you consume are going to be those school foods. If you're on the free and reduced school lunch, which all of our schools are where we live. And so those are the children we need to be protecting the most. There's oftentimes, if you have a school that has a lot of poverty, you have a lot of children that struggle with ODD, ADHD, autism. And so all of those cases of neurologic issues are going up. And then we're feeding them foods that contain synthetic dyes. Luckily, our school is pretty good. Like as far as our lunches, I will call ahead if our son wants to eat lunch at school, and I'll say, can you check the lunch? And so far the lunches have been good. Now, breakfast is another issue, but We've also in our group, we've seen lunch managers that have gotten back to the moms that have inquired about school lunch. And these moms are not moms that can pay to pack lunch. And so their child has a neurologic reaction. Technically, it's not an allergy, so you can't get an allergy note. And so the lunch manager gets back and says, oh, it's in our spaghetti sauce, it's in our pizza, it's in our marinara, and which is, most schools aren't like that, so don't freak out. But at that school it was, and their suggestion was, I think you probably need to send their lunch for them. And so what are parents supposed to do? Like, she can't afford that, but their kid needs that. It's just not, it's not in what we're doing after our documentary, we have a call to action, and we really need parents to act. Like, we need to protect our children, and not just your children. And I think the rhetoric is oftentimes vote with your dollars, and you should vote with your dollars. But there are parents that can't do that, and we need to be protecting their children too. They can't afford to send school lunch, or
so what does it look like for what does it look like for a family that they say, hey, my son or my daughter, I feel like they're being affected by this. We've been using the terminology, he has an allergic reaction.
Yeah.
We just said that's just the terminology we use. It's just easier to say than to have a full conversation with somebody, say, hey, we have a synthetic dye allergy. We cannot consume that. So when we call restaurants, when we call the school, when we call something like that, that's just the way that we say. And then we've taught Walker to say that when he's at a party, and instead of him feeling like he's weird because he's not eating the cupcake, it's like, no, I've got an allergy and I can't have that. It helps mitigate some of those issues.
For sure.
But from a parent standpoint, they hear the conversation, they've seen the results. Now, what do? Do they start writing their school board? You mentioned
We
earlier
do,
you've got
yeah.
some letters. What does that process look like?
Well, I mean, first, if you have a child that's impacted, start telling your story, and that's what you're doing. And secondly, we really need to be taking action. We take a lot of inspiration from Moms Against Drunk Driving. They were just a couple of moms that, were impacted by drinking and driving. And so like they have made such incredible change. And so we believe that parents can do that too. And so what we really need to be doing is we need to be writing our state representatives. Things are not happening at a federal level, unfortunately. So we really have seen a lot more action taken at the state level. And so what I would suggest is figure out in your state who is on educational boards, who is on health boards, health advisory boards, committees, who's passionate about that. Write them, have everybody write them, and we help you out with that. On our website, I have templates. And so I have everything written out. I have the science and I have all the things included. All you do is you write your name. There's a place to write your story. And of course you can edit it. And so we make it easy for you. But we interview a California senator in our documentary, and he said they actually do read their emails. If they get a couple of emails, he said, oh, I can take a little heat. But if they're getting a big influx of parents that are talking about this and that care about it, they do care what their constituents are saying.
Sure.
And so we suggest writing your school board. We suggest writing your state representatives, but also if you have the time, if you're a parent that has the ability to be in the PTA, if you have a parent
PTO.
or the PTO, if you have the ability to get involved and start talking about it. And
I love that.
And so we have learned that teachers have been really receptive. Most doctors have been really receptive. People just generally don't know. I mean, researchers are good. We have 27 clinical trials. I've said that several times. But like they're doing research, they're not marketers getting this out to the public.
Yeah.
And so I think genuinely there's a lot of people that don't know. And if we know, then we can tell people and we can make change.
And
So
we are seeing some movement. We have, there's a lot of this talk with the new administration, and no matter where you fall politically, this is a bipartisan issue. And so
Sure.
like we're not saying support one side over the other, but when we hear somebody talking about wanting to look into synthetic dyes, that gets us excited. So we've got celebrities talking about synthetic dyes. We've got
RFK Jr. I mean, he came out and it's been in front of Congress, right? I mean, the thing that you mentioned earlier about the not Apple O's, what's the
Fruit
Loops,
yeah.
where they're holding the two different types. And it's like, what? So let me ask you the question: why? Why does a company use them if they know this? Is it because they're cheaper, or is it just because it makes it look better?
Make money.
I understand the money, but is it if they get banned? Let's say nationally they get banned. Does it make our food costs go up, or does it stay relatively the same? What's the issue?
So the companies use synthetic dyes, one, because it's cheap. Like, right, synthetic dyes is a byproduct. It's very cheap. It is cosmetic, and so we are, as Americans, we're very visual, and especially when you're marketing to kids love bright colors, and so like it's a marketing technique, it's a tool, it's cheap. It would be technically more expensive for them to use, say, like a natural dye. Like,
you really don't have to dye food.
But
food doesn't have to be colorful.
I mean, if you make your product with food that already has color, then you're not needing it to color. When you're adding color because you're making it things without color, and you're trying to make it taste like fruit, but you're using an artificial flavor that's not a real fruit, and so therefore to make it look like that fruit, you got to add the color. So,
well, and this may be a bit controversial, but we've gotten used to food costing really cheap. Processed food is cheap, and it's oftentimes, so for example, like I always use the example of a protein powder. So say you buy a protein powder, and the company has decided to use a natural or artificial flavor. That's colorless. And so what if it's a strawberry flavor? So they use a strawberry flavor that's colorless. Well, they want it to look like strawberries, so they use synthetic dyes to make it look like strawberries instead of just using strawberries. And so we've kind of gotten used to this really cheap, almost fake food. And I think as a society, we really kind of need to shift to let's eat like real food, like food that is actual food that we can read on an ingredients list and that we know what it is. And so I always suggest when you can, and for us, it's been a slow transition. We haven't just jumped straight into like, we're not completely whole foods or we're
Sure.
not perfect. And it's not like we never go out to eat or have fast food, but like we are trying to slowly transition into eating more real foods. And that can only have just good positive effects on our bodies. But obviously companies are, they are, they can lose money if their foods don't look marketable. And so if we are as consumers used to having brightly colored foods and then all of a sudden they remove it, people get mad. And so back in, you want to talk about the Trix fiasco?
We can't. Well, I was gonna say too, like the companies are gonna make that argument. They're gonna say to do this is going to cost us more money, which in turn is gonna cost the consumer more money. But there's companies out there like if you look at like Aldi. So Aldi is a grocery store chain, and they have their own brand. So Aldi brand stuff, even its Aldi brand is dye free. So they have like there is a dye free Fruit Loops copycat at Aldi that does not have synthetic dyes.
I love that.
Yeah, there's a dye free like Lucky Charms, dude.
Trader Joe's, same thing.
Trader and those
and they're bright and they're vivid and they're
the
beautiful.
Cost of those products
are very cheap.
Are the same.
Very cheap.
Actually, they're
cheaper.
They're
normally
like generic,
cheaper. Yeah,
they're generic costs. Like if you go to Walmart and you buy Fruit Loops, they cost more than if you buy the Walmart version of Fruit Loops. So it's like a generic pricing. So
even Walmart's brand, a lot of their like gummies and medications and things like that are dye free. So for the Benadryl example, Benadryl name brand oftentimes has dyes, but if you buy like the Walmart Great Value brand, you can buy it dye free and it's cheaper, and they just have not put a color in it.
Yeah, like
so
it's
clear. And so
I just wanted to make sure we got across the point that families can hear this. They can see, a radical change in their kids, which is, as a parent, your goal is to sacrifice for your kids, right? That's what love causes.
Exactly.
Love causes you to sacrifice. You're sacrificing of yourself, your resources to invest in your kids. This is an investment, but it's not that big of an investment.
It's not.
It's not. That there are options out there if you will just take a minute and look. That's why I wanted to make sure we got across. So I love that you said that about Aldi. I love that you said that about Trader Joe's. Those are two great places. We shop there a lot. And Walmart. Yeah. Those of those three locations, you normally can find one of those.
Yeah.
But even there, if you can't, there's still options. So in your Facebook group, I definitely want people to get connected there because Hannah and I are part of it. And one of the great things in there is that people will post, hey, I just found this. I found this at Publix, at Kroger, at Ingles, wherever. And I just realized it had dye in it. Just so you're aware, you need to know. Or and then there's the of comments that this people flood in and say, think about this, think about this. And so it's all the alternatives, which I think is fantastic. So I want to take a little bit of a pivot here. Thank y'all so much for your time. You created a documentary, right? That is fascinating. So when you said earlier, you wanted to start asking these questions. You said, hey, Brandon, can you video me? Like, what was that process like? I mean, you both work, you have kids. Like, how did you do this? How long did it take?
I would say by the grace of God alone, he has quite literally opened every single door for us. So every single hurdle, it's been a sacrifice in terms of time. It's been a financial sacrifice. But I mean, honestly, like God has provided. So sacrifice, especially financially, I don't even know that that's the right term. It's been a sacrifice in time and in labor, but God has opened every single door for us.
When we first started, our vision was, it wasn't going to be like bad or anything, but our vision for what the film was going to be was much smaller than what it has turned out to be. So we didn't know any of these researchers. We barely at the time knew other families like ours, like close by, but we did know a few. So maybe we can interview some of these people that have had similar stories like us. We had a local professor who had done some work with dyes, and so she would agree to be part of the film. So we can probably make something with this. And then Whitney stumbled across a lady named, I think first she found the lady in like an NBC like article online about dyes, and she reached out to her, and for whatever reason, this lady's like, sure. Why not?
I love
there's a TEDx talk with about a lady named Rebecca Bevins. She's a doctor. She's a professor. So Dr. Rebecca Bevins. but she
She's a
has a
neuroscientist.
story with her son being sensitive to dyes, and it's at this point I think it's like over 400,000 views on YouTube, and it's like been shared millions of like over 10 million little clips on TikTok of little segments from her TEDx talk. So we reached out to her, and Whitney was able to Whitney's very convincing. She was able to convince her to be a part of it. So
I can talk.
So luckily, Dr. Bevins has kind of been in this world for a long time, and so she introduced us to Lisa from our film. Lisa she's a consultant now because she's retired, but she was the lead scientist at Center for Science and the Public Interest.
Well, and so she introduced us to all these like world's leading synthetic dye
so then
experts,
Lisa,
I love that.
toxicologists,
That's amazing.
researchers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and so we really do like if you're not. I don't think that you have very many scientists on the podcast, but
No, we
we've
don't.
had a lot
Not yet.
of really. We have had a lot of really big advocacy groups that's really science-based, and they are so impressed at the line of experts that we have, and it's quite literally been like the A team. Like I made a list, okay, these are the world's leading synthetic dye experts. I'll settle for the B team, but I want the A team. And for some reason, every single person on our A team has said, okay, even if it took some convincing, especially with Jim Stevenson, the EU, it took a lot of convincing because he had some bad experience with press in the past, but it's been incredible in terms of like finances. That was the scary part of it for us because we thought, okay, we already have the equipment, we have the talent, we have the ability. We knew we edited it ourselves, we shot it ourselves, I directed it. Of course, I did all the marketing and things like that. So the only cost in our mind was going to be just traveling to these interviews. So our first round of fundraising was just $10,000 just to get us to these interviews. And we scarcely had that. We had probably put in at that
Our
time.
first interviews we paid for.
The first 3 we paid for about $5,000 that first round. And then we realized, okay, you need lawyers' fees, you need E&O insurance. So because, it was getting to the point where these companies are not going to like this documentary. So we need to protect ourselves. We have to start a separate LLC. We have to have insurance so that if we are sued, they will sue our company and not us. And then we need insurance to help us cover those costs. And then to get that insurance, you have to have a lawyer, and that lawyer costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so like there are so many fees and aspects, and even like our hard drive, like you don't think about that, but we spent probably $6,000 on just hard drives alone, which is insane. And so there were a lot of expenses that we weren't expecting. So our first round of crowdfunding was mostly friends and family. And then we, of course, put quite a bit of our savings into it. Our second round of crowdfunding, most of our friends and family had already given, and some of them gave again, but not very many. It was like our community,
random strangers,
came together, and we had over 300 financial backers. And I mean, $5, $10, but then upwards of like $3,000. So all in all, we have raised about, what did we raise total? 35?
I think we put in our portion, and then we raised about 11,000 first round. I think another 10,000.
Then we had a local grant.
Then we got a grant for
Nice.
16,000. So all in all, about 40 to 50 is what we raised.
And then our
our
portion that we put in from our savings,
between 40 and 60.
But I even say but God has provided every step of the way. Like we put a substantial amount of money from our savings account into the film, but our savings account has stayed the same because God's provided other work for us.
Well, I'll tell you that $40,000 to $60,000 sounds like a lot of money, but in the world of making a
it's nothing
film, micro budget
it's
so how long is the film? How long is it?
83 minutes. Hour
so feature film.
Minutes.
Yeah, feature film. Fantastic. And
people are very surprised at the quality and the level of like they are.
We should have sent it to you.
They're really surprised about that it was made by 2 people, filmmakers.
Well, I'm very excited to see it. So today's December 17th when this is getting released. What is big about today?
Today is the day of our pre-sale release. So pre-sales have just hit, so you can you can get pre-sales on Amazon. I'm trying to think. I think Amazon.
You should know this.
I know I should know something. Amazon, Apple, Fandango at home.
Go to those 3.
Maybe Google has pre-sales. I can't remember, but it'll come out.
It's important that, we talked about writing senators, but in terms of like helping us as filmmakers, it's really important that we have really good pre-sales, because we have two incredible distributors, which for an indie film, having distributors at all is incredible.
Sure.
But they have put us in front of some major streaming platforms, and Amazon we're really proud of. Most people have access to Amazon, but we do have larger streamers. We have, do you want to say the names? No. Okay, never mind. So we have two really big streamers that that's on your TV right now that say no to all indie films, but that want to they have another meeting set up for us after Sundance, and after they see,
They will. So
they
they
want to
that.
see our pre-sales.
They were
And so-
pitched, but they asked to be repitched, which typically they would just say no, they're not interested.
And our distributor said that's not common, so they're
Yeah,
interested.
I love that.
And so if
So
we have
pre-sale
a really
numbers need
good
to be good.
showing, exactly, then we have a good chance of not only having this accessible to everybody, but having it accessible to like
Wider
a
audience.
wider audience that's even broader than our audience.
And then when is it officially released? So pre-sale
out-
goes on today.
So VOD, which is video on demand, which is all those places I was talking about, Amazon, Apple TV, Google, Fandango at Home, Vimeo on demand, that comes out January 14th.
Nice.
So that's when it'll be live, and then DVDs come out the 21st of January. So
I love that.
yeah, it'll be available then. So if you have a pre-sale, you can watch it the day it comes out on January 14th, which we're really excited that it's coming up really fast. Like it seemed like it was a long ways away, but it keeps getting closer and closer. So
Well, congratulations, guys. Thank you so much for doing it. Thank you for the resources. We have some friends and family that we're going to send it to you as someone they've pushed back a little bit on us and said like, hey, why are you doing this? And it's going to be a great resource for us to say, we see this, we see it in our family. So the proof is in the pudding because of the way that our son has acted. And so we're just cutting them out. But some other people may need this. They may need, they're the wool's over their eyes. They don't see it in their kids. Their kids may not have a hypersensitivity to it. That's completely fine. But having this kind of resource is going to be, I'm so excited. I'm proud of you both. I'm very excited for the film. Thank y'all so much for the investment of your time and resources for yourself and the group that funded it. So if they've listened to this whole thing and they've said, hey, I really want to learn more, give us all the places they can get in touch with you in the community. Where can they get connected to the documentary? Where can they get connected to the Facebook group and the resources on the website?
So for the documentary on Instagram and on Facebook, our handle is just To Die For the Documentary.
Oh, and it's DYE.
Yeah,
there you go.
It's a 2 DYE for the documentary. And then the Facebook group, Whitney said, is Die Free Family Swaps, Resources, and Recipes. You can find that on Facebook. And then you can also go to our website, which has links to all these places, and that's just todieforthedocumentary.com.
Well, then you can also subscribe. And when you subscribe, I automatically send you a list of synthetic dyes, which is actually on the resources tab as well. But it'll automatically send you this list. It has a list of synthetic dyes, why you should avoid them. And it goes even beyond the neurologic effects that we talked about. Unexpected products that contain dyes and synthetic dye-free brands. So
I love it.
That resource, you can subscribe to that. I'll send you the templates. I'll send you updates about what's going on with legislation and lists and whatnot. So you can subscribe, and we'll keep you updated on all fronts.
That's fantastic. Well, Brandon, Whitney, thank you, friends, very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the investment and the impact that you're having in our son and his family. We're very, very thankful. Very, very thankful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the family table. We'll see you soon. Thank you for pulling up a chair at the family table. We hope today's conversation has strengthened the bonds that hold us together. Don't forget to follow the show to keep these heartwarming stories coming your way. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and share it with friends and family. And if there's someone whose family story you think would be a perfect fit for the show, drop their name in the comments. We would love to hear from you and bring more families to the table. Until next time, cherish those moments with your loved ones.